So welcome everyone once again. Thank you very much that you joined for the second panel. It's lovely to see a lot of people and a lot of engagement and interested. So today we will discuss AI in public service because UK government truly believe and see a big opportunity to deliver growth through AI, launching AI action plan, AI playbook for civil service, and a lot of different examples how AI can be used in public sector and civil service. For example, Red Box, government AI chat box, or Lex and Parplex, AI tools to analyze law in UK, historical law, and also analyze parliamentary debates. So there's a lot of development around, and the promise of this panel to try to address trade-off between the benefit of deploying AI in public sector and civil service, and what are the challenges and how we can overcome them. So I want to mention that we try to build a positive agenda, but at the same time, if you have some elements of concern, you will have an opportunity to open your questions. And to address those dynamic fields, we have a brilliant lineup of speakers that I will introduce one by one, starting with Jess. So Jessica Montgomery is the director of AI CAM, the University of Cambridge strategic mission to develop AI technologies that serve citizens, science, and society. And there is a lot of long list, honestly, of 15 different research projects, so I mentioned just few. Along this role in AI CAM, she also leads Accelerate Science, Data Trust Initiatives, and network of European AI research. So it spans a different perspective and experience from politics to science to hardcore AI computer science. Next one, we have Faye Skevington, who is the head of AI alignment for education in the UK government Department of Education. In January this year, if I'm not mistaken, Faye delivered the UK Global Summit on Generative AI for Education and published national safety standards for AI, which recognize education as a high-stakes environment requiring stronger protection for children. And I'm slightly proud of it, that's why I mentioned it. You're currently completing the Master of Science in Artificial Intelligence.
Yes.
Which is great. And we have Dr. Antonio Weiss, who was previously research associate in Bennett Institute and currently research affiliate with Bennett School. So long story and long history of engagement. He is also author of several books, last of AI Demystified, previous year published. He's a senior partner at the PSC, a public service consultancy advising senior clients on AI, user-centric design, innovation thinking, and utilizing technology to redesign public services to meet citizens' need. And he is also part of the UK government digital service responsible AI advisory panel. So we have a brilliant lineup of people from different perspectives. And to kickstart this panel, I would like to ask all of you to provide slightly your understanding what is going on when we combine AI in public sector or AI in civil service. And let's start with Jess.
Great, thanks, Alex. Well, maybe to start, AI is not an IT rollout. It's much messier than that. We're in a space now where we have this enthusiasm about AI in public services. We have great technical capabilities, but we've got to engage with that messy reality between the technology and the real-world deployment, which means really thinking about what type of value can we create with AI, and how do we create that value in a way that bridges operational efficiency and democratic mandates. And that might mean working in a different way in public services, so thinking more about how we drive innovation from the ground up.
Great. Faye?
So I'll just situate myself in terms of my roles, because AI alignment for education it's a bit of a strange job title. I don't know anyone else who has it. And I just want to explain what I mean by alignment, because that can sometimes seem very technical. But I'm coming at this and I'm really thinking about AI from a socio-technical alignment perspective. And for me, I see that happening at 3 levels. So we've kind of got the operational alignment. In education, does an AI tool give the right kind of information? Is it giving a harmful answer to a child? So operational level, that's more the standard alignment. But then there's the kind of strategic alignment. Maybe AI is helping children to complete tasks, but are they really learning? Is it delivering for the kind of strategic ambition for an institution, for the public sector. And then there is the kind of third level, which is the systemic level. Maybe AI helps children to improve their grades, great, but what does it mean for their social and emotional development? What does it mean for the citizens that we're creating? And how do we consider how model behaviour affects the systemic development of people and how we deliver through public services?
Thank you.
Thank you. I might focus particularly on that public service element. So 3 quick reflections. One is that demand is far outstripping supply, and there is a need to change. And anyone who says that public services are, good enough for what citizens expect is, well, I'd ask you to ask yourself the question again. So there is a need for change, and it's rare that technologies can come along which offer a potential for bridging that gap. So there's a responsibility to use that. But on the second point, AI, particularly transformer architecture-based large language models, are a really novel technology, and nobody knows yet where the story ends, nobody knows yet where the true value will accrue, so we have to use it with future generations in mind, and therefore not locking us into bad decisions and being conscious that actually today's quick thought, clever thought may be tomorrow's big mistake. And then the final point is just there is something unique about public services which I really hope doesn't get forgotten. They are universal. That means they have to be for everyone. We cannot exclude people from them. We should always remember that the risk threshold is almost certainly different in public services, and the forensic lens that gets cast on policymakers and public service leaders trying to make change is so unflattering and so unkind, and I think we need to be conscious of all of those factors when using AI properly.
Thank you. This is a very diverse perspective. And I really like the point around messy reality and values. So I'd like to ask Jess, given our actual infrastructure in UK, what are the opportunities and what is the risk and how we can overcome them to roll out and release this AI ambition?
Yeah, so in terms of infrastructure, at the moment we hear a lot about data centers, about compute infrastructure, but underpinning that, there are some real questions about our public service data infrastructure. So do we have the data we need to do AI effectively in public services in the right formats, in the right places, governed in the ways that will allow people to have confidence in the development of AI? That's a governance problem as much as it is a technical one, and raises some big questions about what our digital public infrastructure needs to be. Organisational capacity is also sort of under-discussed as an issue. So it's not just that departments lack data scientists, it's that to be able to really deploy AI in a way that is trustworthy in the long term, we need staff of all different types to be engaged in discussions about AI capabilities and governance, maintaining that sort of individual and institutional oversight. We already saw in the Horizon Post Office scandal a reference point about what happens when you have not just bad technology, but bad organisational practices in terms of challenging and governing the use of that technology. Then underpinning all this, I think we need to be talking about public trust and confidence. So we hosted in Cambridge public dialogues with 100 Cambridgeshire residents just before Christmas, talking about the use of AI in local government. And as you might expect, people recognise exactly what Antonio is saying, that services right now are creaking at the seams. There needs to be an intervention that helps deliver more for less. However, they're also setting out the red lines that publics have been telling us about for 10 years or more now, that they want meaningful human oversight, that they want AI to be used in ways that enhance our human interactions, not diminish them, that they have significant concerns about security and privacy and the capability of our democratic institutions to govern AI in a context where so much AI development and deployment is dominated by large commercial players. So what we really heard from those dialogues is that any rollout that is rooted only in a cost-saving narrative is not going to build that public trust and support in the long term, which we should also be thinking of as sort of core infrastructure enabling AI development and use.
Thank you. And I think it's connected deeply with, your operational and strategic level. So what we should do, or what we are currently doing in your department to achieve this safe, effective, real-world implementation in schools and education?
Sure. I mean, that's a beautiful segue, because I think what I can do is talk about some of those levels specifically for education and what we're doing to address those challenges in education. So you talked about the data foundations. In August 2024, we launched a pilot called the Content Store, which is specifically trying to bring together the right content and reference material for AI to draw from, because we know that AI is only ever going to be as good as the data that it draws from. We'd done some early testing and found that teachers were saying, well, this is coming up with kind of US curriculum materials, it's not aligned to what we need. So that pilot's looking at what does it take to bring that together as a curated data set and make it machine readable, make it so that AI can reference the right material immediately. You also talked about capability. I think there's a really strong piece for the kind of technical capability, but also if we're talking about adoption in the public sector, there's a lot of public sector workers who really need to have the capability to understand and use it appropriately. So one of the things the department has put in place is training materials for teachers about the safe and effective use of AI. And then there's this piece around the kind of the tools themselves and that safety layer and assurance. As Aleksei said, we put in place standards for product safety standards for generative AI in education, where it's set out what AI tools should or should not do. And that includes some quite challenging things for those model providers, like saying, actually, AI that is used by children shouldn't be using the first person. They do not need to be interacting with it as a relational subject. It may help their learning, but it shouldn't be displacing human relationships. And that kind of insight came from all of the work that we've been doing with children and young people, and from listening to teachers who are saying, well, it's interesting, I can see some potential, but I don't know what's safe, I don't know what's available. And then finally, I just add one piece of the puzzle to your kind of structure, which is the evidence. We don't know what works yet, and there might be entirely new ways that AI could support learning that we haven't even thought of yet, because it's a new method of interaction. So the government's also investing in the EdTech Evidence Board and trialling through test beds in schools, because absolutely, we don't want to roll out something that doesn't work, and the conditions under which things do or do not work and which groups is really important that we know, rather than seeing it as a kind of, as just AI is the solution, so let's go.
Great. It seems like evidence point is fit in our first discussion. In an AI world, it's even more important because a different model from LLM to diffusion models require different amount of evidence and approaches. But talking about this kind of awareness for children's safety from the perspective of teachers, etc., Antonio, I will slightly drop you under the bus around systemic risks. This has been doing a lot of good intention around AI deployment and rollout, but do we understand the risk behind it and what we can do with this?
Well, I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation, and I would thoroughly encourage people to look at the work that the Department for Education is doing on AI. There's a level of depth and focus and questioning of big thorny issues which would suggest actually there is an awareness of those risks. Now, are those risks mitigated? Well, that's a different question, but you've got to start by identifying them, and I think there is a good there is maturity. One of my slight bugbears, so I used to do political advisory in the time, is that politics works in black and white. And actually many commentators talking about AI see things very much in a simplistic, as you would do, you've got to tell a story, but binary world. AI is ChatGPT licenses, of course it's not. And there's a huge amount of depth of thought and practice that goes into that, but still more to be done. But that requires engagement and understanding from everyone in this policy-making communities like this one. Just one systemic risk which I might just raise that I feel maybe hasn't got quite enough attention, and actually Jess, it really touches on what you said at the start, is AI, everyone now is talking about generative AI, we shouldn't be forgetting here, actually much more proven variants of machine learning from some time before, but now the whole buzz is agentic AI, and my big worry, at the moment at least, is that people use that agentic solutions as an opportunity to say, we don't need to do the hard work of thinking about redesigning services properly, or actually sorting out our data flows, or indeed just getting our organizational structures right. And that is a new risk that I'm seeing more and more, that kind of the snake oil of agentic gets sold. And people are aware of that, but it's something which I feel like could be pushed up the agenda a little bit more.
Thank you. And I think it's also raises a big question about, can we scale up the AI experience in public sector? Because of the development of models and new approaches, agentic AI, or new way of thinking about LLMs, it's always a trick, trade-off, and balance between improve efficiency in public sector to deliver some outcome, and at the same time how public can accept it and what is the values behind it. So I would like to ask Faye, in your department and especially in education, it's a very hot topic, how we can balance it, if we can, maybe we cannot.
I think from my perspective, I wouldn't see those things in opposition, but say that public trust, public acceptability should be seen as a kind of core enabler of delivery, especially when we're talking about schools. We've got 22,000 schools, we've got 500,000 teachers, we've got students, and we've got parents, all of whom have strong views. Some people are really scared, some people are really excited. But if there isn't that public trust, at best it'll be patchy, and at worst it'll be actively unhelpful. So I think I think you touched on it. I think that we think about the infrastructure that we need in terms of data, in terms of energy, in terms of compute. But I think we need to think about another layer of infrastructure, which is the trust infrastructure. Which is, we've talked about standards. You can have standards. How are you assuring AI models against it? How do you make sure that there is appropriate governance that feels real to people, that doesn't feel like a checkbox, and that works at many levels? At school level, what decisions are schools taking? At government level, what's the oversight there, and how do we bring public voice into that? Because I think, again, you can't separate out assurance, you can't separate out standards from participation from the people who are affected. So we've done a really wide range of public participation. We've done sort of much more traditional deliberative engagement, which informed much of our earlier work. And then more recently, with the standards, we've worked with Connected by Data to run distributed dialogues. So over 1,000 pupils from around the country having conversations about what does safe AI mean to them, what do they want from AI, and then that work feeds directly into the standards and into kind of global summits and everything else. So being able to draw that line of really showing people that we've listened, as well as listening, is a really core part of the public trust. And if we don't have that, we won't have adoption. So I think they're fundamentally linked.
This is beautiful, because trust is usually connected to transparency from the perspective of public policy and political science, and usually how we engage in politics. So the logical continuation of this would be how we can build this transparency decision-making when we use those technology. Can we build trust or something around, especially with this black box notion? So Antonio, in your specifically role and engagement, what do you think we can do for transparency here?
Well, I would slightly push back on a couple of levels. So, obviously, trust is incredibly important, but it's such a thorny, multifarious concept. I was lucky. I was just saying to Faye, I studied here at Churchill 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now, and I remember we still used to pay just so they'd come in tuition fees, and we did it by cheque. And there was nothing that you could say to me, and maybe I was a kind of an early Luddite on this, that would have encouraged me to put my bank details into a website for that payment. And my parents would have killed me if I'd have done that. And nowadays, you don't even think about it. That is literally happening agentically all the time. And I don't think there was any kite mark, any infrastructure play, anything that could have hastened that trust element. It was because it was value, it was because I saw peers using it, it became commonplace. And there's a time like there which is different. And transparency per se, again, wouldn't necessarily have I'm not sure help there. And we don't have many things to learn from when new technologies come from, and this is why I think it's the historians' time to step up to the mark. So let's learn from recent general purpose technologies, be it the smartphone or the open internet. And the big thing that it comes back to me is that the hard-won trust comes from it delivered value. It was useful and it worked. And that has to be something that's repeated over and over again, and it will change in different societies because the UK is a slightly older demography. I suspect we will lag behind on adoption, and you can't force it. I think if you try and force it too much and push it too hard, you then risk other challenges. And part of the solution to that requires a maturity from politicians and policymakers about timescales and expectations for what's deliverable. So there is nobody likes to hear it, but getting a business case return today or tomorrow isn't going to happen. That's just the truth, so let's work with it.
This was a beautiful pill, and I think it's good that I feed you ideas. So in a 10-ish minutes, I will open the floor to your questions. You can start with transparency one to push back on the pushback. But rising the heat, I also interested in efficiency. We so believe in it, and we push so hard to achieve it somehow. So what is the reality here? Can we do it? Can we achieve this efficiency gain in public sector AI models?
Well, given the range of strains that our public services are under, talking about efficiency is vital. And there are really serious efficiency gains we can be looking at with these technologies. We've heard about systems locally with South Cambridgeshire, that is a system in development to support planning. So this is using a large language model developed in collaboration with the University of Cambridge, with ARU, with the University of Liverpool, that analyses local plan consultations. Now, normally analysing these consultation responses would take the equivalent of over a year of staff time. With a large language model, they've managed to reduce that to under a month. That's a huge efficiency saving and an opportunity to actually bring in much more engagement around the type of evidence that consultation is developing. So efficiency is really important. We also sometimes over-index on the idea of sort of efficiency metrics that don't really recognise what we're looking for from public services. So too often we talk about what's measurable rather than what matters. And what people are looking for from public services is that sense of engagement, of being seen as a human, of having their needs met, and of the ability to challenge things when that goes wrong. So can we start talking about efficiency in a way that embeds those types of values and the things people are looking for? Because this isn't just about processing decisions faster or processing paperwork faster, though those are important applications. It's about a system that maintains our shared democratic values, that maintains due process, and recognises that often the messiness is where democracy creeps in. So what's the type of messiness we still need to keep in these systems that mean, a bus driver will slow down if they see somebody struggling to make the stop. That means a teacher will spend an extra hour with a student they can see is struggling at the end of the day. These things that are really about our shared humanity, where AI can offer opportunities to enhance those interactions rather than diminish them. But they won't do that if we're not making the active design and governance choices to start building that in now.
Great. May I also slightly follow up on a slightly different perspective? Because when we are talking about efficiency, we always think about, we will deploy the particular type of models or LLM solutions. I will not name companies, but usually they're slightly US or Chinese ones. So, and I'm winking because AI can publish AI sovereignty policy paper or report. So what is the right balance here for UK between building versus buying? Because your example of planning, it's what we build, but usually we also buy a lot. Do we need to think about this balance, or it's fine?
We need to be more intentional about that balance. So the report that Alex is referring to talked about the need for sovereignty across the AI value chain. So thinking about it in terms of data, model development, applications, and the human capital around that. Saying that actually what the UK has, we might talk a lot about our inability to lead in large model development, but we can absolutely lead in human capital and in training people and leveraging what we have in our research base, in our professions, in our ability to have these more democratic conversations about how, where, and when to use AI. Because off-the-shelf tools will be suitable in many contexts, they can do great things, But we don't want to end up creating that type of structural accountability gap that comes from building our public sector infrastructure around tools that we don't fully control.
Great. Before I move on, because I have several follow-ups questions for everyone, maybe someone want to jump in on this sovereignty element, kind of build versus buy.
Well, I mean, maybe the only add to say is that what we see at the moment with the Straits of Hormuz and supply chain bottlenecks are not something that you want to bake into any economy. And AI, from the sand to the chips, through to the energy, through to the end user benefits, has its own value chain. Nobody knows yet where that value is going to accrue. So that intentionality, I think, is so important. And the de minimis, I would have thought, is to try and minimize dependence across any one of those points. And that's hard, and that requires cost, and that won't be the cheapest solution. It may not be the fastest solution. But I think unless you start from that point that you want to minimize the over-reliance on a given small number of players with any point, you will end up in a place where you won't want to be in 10, 20 years' time.
Great. And building on the idea of supply chain and value chain, I really want to touch, because we slightly seem like promoting connected by data in Queen, but I really want to touch the question about data, especially in the fields like schools and education, NHS, some elements of energy. So basically, is it sensitive so much what we should do with access to the data, to AI development and deployment, and should we do something with regulation of the data for AI development and deployment? And if I may, starting with Faye, because you're at the department do a lot of work around this.
Yeah, so I mentioned the content store. I think what this kind of LLM AI is challenging us to do is to think about data differently. So we, speak to colleagues often. Data colleagues are very much in your very structured data, your facts, your figures, your names. But data, obviously, for LLMs is the content of the internet. It is a lot of unstructured textual data or image data. And we don't really have the structures for holding and managing and thinking about that yet. So in developing the content store, that's kind of one of the jumps that we had to do. But the other interesting thing about that is that it's governed under different laws than personal data. So data which is, it's intellectual property, and that applies for children's work. So in my scope, children's schoolwork is their intellectual property, and we've never really had to think about that before because it's never really had a commercial value before. And now, children's schoolwork, children's interactions with chatbots is a valuable source of data for training models. How do we manage that in a way that is respectful of children's rights, but also maybe considers how this could help education? So that was one of our earliest pieces of engagement, was talking to children, parents, and teachers about how we might manage IP in the context of children's IP in the context of AI. And that's a conversation we're still having. It's ongoing. We kind of fed in a couple of lines to the IP consultation, which is now reported. But I think it's never going to be a one-size-fits-all for, right, we're going to have some new data regulation that's going to solve everything. I think we're going to have to think about these things in particular contexts, in particular sectors, and especially when we're thinking about things like children's data, it's likely that you're going to need enhanced protections because of their vulnerability and kind of legal inability to make those decisions.
Before I open the floor, and it's slightly personal because I do a lot of international politics stuff, I'm really interested in the idea of fits for all. So if you look on international perspective, how different countries and regions deploy AI in public sector, we basically see slightly kind of binary approach. There is the US approach, where it's usually or less regulation or non-regulation to open the market, to drive innovation, and then we will think. Or more like European Union approach, right? We will regulate pre-deployment to be sure that it serves our values, etc. And I'm interested from all of you, what is the UK position here can be? Should we follow more US lead? Should we follow more European Union? Or we should be innovative and create our own view on this? If we can start with Jess, just one.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And if I was to think about other technology areas, comparing US, UK, and EU, what we'd often see is exactly as you say, US would go very market-led, EU would go very regulation-led, UK would sort of try some kind of middle path where we convened some expert committees and had a bit of discussion and went on that basis.
Walk around bushes.
Which raises a question about, firstly, where is government getting its expert advice from on AI? And there are some serious questions there about how the UK government maintains access to expertise that is going to help it deploy these systems in a way that addresses all of the questions you've been asking about sovereignty, about public value, about what we need to build kind of for our own ecosystem. I think the opportunity for the UK is to try something like that again, but actually also to work in a different way, to start thinking about how it seeds innovative activities, learns from what works, and then scales from there. So we see great examples locally in some of our local government here of councils setting up AI clubs, which are essentially council staff coming together once a month to talk about how they see AI being used in their work. But you see these things grow from a couple of people seeing AI for the first time and talking about their fears about the impact on work and so on, through to a whole ecosystem of people who are developing new AI applications in planning, in environmental management, in office administration. And actually, can we do more to learn from that type of approach, which is really putting the power in the hands of frontline workers, saying, we'll support you to innovate, learn what works, and then we'll scale from there, rather than trying to settle the rules of the road too early.
Brilliant. As I affiliated with Bennett, I should say that we are thinking a lot about knowledge transfer, slightly pitch. Antonio, maybe you want to jump in on international scale?
Well, I think the concept of the middle path, just from a purely innovation theory perspective, makes a lot of sense. Education is different to defense, is different to healthcare, is different to administrative services, and actually having a granularity of approach with separate expert regulators, and I think regulators always get a tough time and a kicking, and it's seldom justified. So I will stand up for the regulators in this instance. But one of the challenges that I do see, so I will be retiring in a few weeks. I've been a local government councillor for 12 years now. And one of the issues in local government was, I would say there's been almost too much, it'll be interesting what Andy Burnham has to say on this later, too much decentralisation of power on the help of scaling up. Because once you get to a point where actually this thing works, common open source local government Drupal for websites for councils, unless there is something to encourage that joining up and collaboration, it doesn't really happen. And that would be a great opportunity to miss. Like, in a world of finite resource and expertise, we don't want everyone doing their own AI innovations from scratch. We need to get to a point where, well, how do we work out this is mature enough to say we can safely scale it? And that's something which is very hard to do, but just because it's hard doesn't mean it should be ignored.
Brilliant. Faye?
So I think what I would say is it's not quite as simple as like regulate or don't regulate. There's a huge, from my perspective as a civil servant, regulation is one lever, and within that lever there are many choices how you do it. In terms of what we've done with the product safety standards for AI in education is quite a different approach to, for example, the AI Act in the EU, which is really regulating risk assessments and process. Our standards are saying actually it's not about risk assessments and process so much. Here are some specific design decisions which we are choosing to constrain and say these are specific choices that you can make. So I think what I would say is there's a lot of nuance, and we're going to have to iterate because we're not going to get it right first time. New risks, new opportunities will arise. And I think the other thing I would say is, we talk about regulation like it's this one thing. It has to be primary legislation. It has to be really strict. There's huge amounts of levers that the public sector can use in terms of procurement, in terms of guidance, in terms of soft standards, in terms of our work on standards. We've had really warm reception from big tech companies and small tech companies saying, right, yeah, you've put those out, you've said that that's what good looks like, we're working towards this, this is how we meet it already, this is what we're going to change. So I think it's, yes, I wouldn't diminish it to a kind of one-dimensional thing on regulation.
Great. And it's very happy to hear that big tech and small tech companies hearing you and engaging with you. I think we're ready to open the floor. So we will do the traditional way of working. I will collect 2 free questions, provide the time to answer, and then once again. So let's start on the right and move to the left. We will have a gentleman in the back. First question. Second question would be here. And third question. We need some, gender diversity. So yes, and third one here. Thank you very much. Yes.
It took me about an hour to build with Claude Code a better school finder dashboard than the Department for Education puts forward. That's not a ding against the Department of Education, it's just really easy to build really good dashboards at the moment. The problem is that the data, which I'm very happy is open source or is publicly available, isn't live. There's no live API. So I either have to set up an agent to retrieve the data manually all the time, or I just won't be able to provide a live website. And it's even worse for things like catchment areas, or the actual equivalent of catchment areas that we have now, which are done on local authority basis and are done differently by every local authority. So my question really is, given how easy it is to build really, really good ways of navigating and using the data that the government holds, what's it going to take for government to provide live APIs for the information that it puts out in other kind of one-shot data sets or in really, really unformatted ways?
Great. Second question will go from here on the row number 4, I think, on the right. Row number, yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panel, because it's been very interesting so far. I write a newspaper column about this stuff. And so I'm John Norton. For the last year, every time I've met somebody outside of academia, I ask them about AI. And over that year, I've discovered that there is one consistent finding, which is that people's attitudes and attitudes towards the technology critically depends on whether or not they've had any engagement with it. And by engagement, usually it doesn't just mean playing a game with ChatGPT. It means something more. And what you find is that people who have engaged with it, the conversations are much better. And the reason I bring this up is because I read recently a very interesting blog post by Martha Lane Fox, because she's as skeptical as I am about these high-powered elite discussions that we've just had. And her view was that broad, ambitious statements by the government that they're going to reskill Britain for AI actually don't cut the mustard. And she made an interesting proposal in her blog post, which she said, we should put supervised AI tools in people's hands, in job centres, libraries and community hubs, with guardrails and trained support. If a 50-year-old logistics coordinator in Sunderland can't safely use these tools to rebuild her CV or test a business idea, we've already decided who this technology is for. And I think that's spot on.
I just want to mention it's the first time when someone told me that I'm from elite circle, so I'm super proud right now. I mean, this is a huge achievement. And the third question there.
Thank you. The question is primarily addressed to Faye. In your 3 alignment areas, you didn't mention teachers. Now, Teacher Tat ran some questions about AI on Friday, and I haven't had time to digest all the statistics, but essentially a third of teachers said they had no confidence in using AI themselves. And what worries me, and I know DFE did a pilot last summer looking at what teachers felt about it, but the trouble is I think you may drive a sort of digital divide. I think that's how the Sutton Trust described it. And I just wondered, and in the interest of transparency, I should say, and you probably know, I chair the SAC for DFE, so I'm quite involved with this. But it does worry me that seeing things through an equity lens is absolutely crucial, and that means helping the teachers who are probably in the less advantaged schools to feel confident that they can bring on the next generation. And I think that feeds into something for all three of you about trust and understanding misinformation. So the Curriculum and Assessment Review says we should be teaching everyone about, all our pupils about misinformation, but no indication of who's going to do that teaching. And again, I think there is a real worry that children will access these tools at home, if not at school, and they will take what they will from it, and some of them may take things you would rather they didn't take from it.
Thank you. And so we have one question on government data, one question about elitism. I'm joking, it's not about elitism, it's about AI attitudes and engagement and supervision. One question specifically, and I want to feed one additional question here because it's linked to both of them. If the public involved in this discussion, what about data ownership and access? Because it's one of the questions from online. Who would like to start? I'm super happy I did not answer on those, so I'm just going to chill.
I can pick up on some of the specific ones.
Cool.
So in terms of live APIs, we do have the Find and Use APIs service at the Department for Education. The content store, which I've been working on, the API isn't live yet, but it will be shortly. I wanted to pick up on the point of we should put AI tools in people's hands. I get that. I think we also need to accept that AI isn't the finished product, and it's not one thing. So I think probably what we're saying is not actually, let's take a step before that, and instead of just putting an AI tool in people's hands, how do we co-design it with teachers so that it meets their needs rather than an external view of what we think they need. So the work that was announced in January to co-design AI tools with teachers and schools, I think tries to address that, but puts people even more in the driving seat. And then just to pick up on the kind of the levels of alignment, just to be really clear, I was talking particularly about my role, which is about the AI tools themselves. Absolutely appreciate and agree that the importance of upskilling teachers, providing access, and providing kind of knowledge to children and young people is also within the department, but not my specific remit.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, maybe to expand on a couple of those points, I really like the API question because it illustrates part of where we are in AI policy at the moment, where we've been talking about data governance, about data access, skills, and so on, but there's just this gap between policy and practice where when we're having policy conversations, we're not quite tapping into the actual issues people are having on the ground when they're trying to innovate with these technologies, which are generally just slightly off what we're talking about when we're talking in central government about what AI policy should look like. So I love these examples of I was trying to do this, it should be simple. Like the AI side was simple, it was this API issue that was complicated. Maybe connected to that and connected to John's point, one of the conversations we've been having in our AI for Science work at the moment is how do we make agentic AI tools more accessible across a broader range of researchers. And we're sort of inspired by this question of what would a Raspberry Pi look like for agentic AI? Something that is open, community-oriented, hackable, something that actually you learn by innovating with the product. And I think we can apply that more broadly as well as what's the suite here that would actually make these technologies feel more accessible and more community-oriented. Because the fantastic thing about the natural language interfaces we have now is that they're much more accessible than older style machine learning. If I think 10 years ago when we were doing public dialogues, maybe less than 10% of people had heard of machine learning. Now the conversations we're having are much more rooted in, I was working with ChatGPT last night, or I asked Claude something last week. That conversation has completely shifted, and we should take that as an opportunity to really widen access to the capacity to innovate.
Thank you. I love this point about democratization of AI, because we all have this promise a few years ago, and now we see that it built new way of inequality around access and usage. Antonio, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I'll try and weave some thoughts, maybe not necessarily quite on the question. So the gentleman here mentioned Martha Lane Fox. So Martha Lane Fox helped to spearhead and create the UK Government Digital Service. And the reason why I say that is because we should take pride and confidence from the fact that the UK government, in the recent past, was truly, amongst the very best in the world at digitising government services. Didn't get everything right all the time, but was genuinely world leading, and is still good at that. And anyone who's renewed their passport online recently will know how simple and quick that is, and that was because of GDS, and Martha Lane Fox played a big part in that. But it relates to the question about APIs. So with the PSC, we had the privilege of working on something called Government as a Platform about 10 years ago for GDS, and one of the big initiatives which they wanted to roll out was something called registers. So these were like canonical sources of the truth for common things. So that could be local authority names or schools, of which I don't know if the DFE has yet a single source of the truth for those 22,000 schools. But that was deprioritized because there was something new and sexier somewhere over here. And this is my concern that comes back to AI, that we don't do the basics of good plumbing, and we shouldn't forget that that's essential. And then the question of kind of the digital divide and putting AI more in people's hands, I worry, I may be wrong of course, that that's the wrong answer. Not because we should democratize access, but precisely because these LLMs have that magical Arthur C. Clarke science fiction magical quality about them. It means that people don't do the mental heavy lifting to ask the question, how does this thing work? And I think if they don't know how it works, we won't make good policy and we won't make good decisions. So, for instance, ask somebody what happens technically when you make an Instagram post. Very few people know, but if you understand that, then you will understand all of the cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities which will emerge from that. If you ask somebody, well, how did we get these awful nudification apps emerging from Grok's AI tools? Well, if you can answer the question to that, you understand, well, what are these models trained on? How are they allowed to be trained on that data? Why aren't we legislating to stop that? And I think, access to AI tools is only part of the answer. Understanding some of the fundamental principles about how the technology works will be a better way to get to a better form of policy making.
Great, thank you very much. So we will move to the left side of the one question, second question right back, and the third one. Do this once again.
I'm Ben Martin, Science Policy Unit at Sussex University. AI in public services is clearly not a uniquely UK issue. Which countries are in the lead? What governments have gone furthest? Not just national governments, but perhaps regional and local governments. What can we learn from them about what works and what doesn't work?
Thank you very much. One of the, I think it's one of our students. Yes. No. Yes, thank you. Once again, we try to build a gender equality. Please participate with us.
Hi. So actually, I have kind of two questions. More
Pick
of
one.
A question of.
Pick one.
Okay, one.
Thank you.
When implementing AI in the policy field or in public services, how is it taken to, or do you feel that it's used as a quick fix solution that actually pulls focus from other problems, for example, in education? I don't know how bad it is in the UK, but in other countries, serious underfunding of schools and teachers is now, kind of being quick fixed by, let's implement AI. So kind of the question of how is this divide being bridged and how is this taken into account?
Thank you very much. And one question here. Yes, thank you.
Hi there, Patrick Towell, Director of Creative Economy at the Audience Agency. I'm lucky enough to live most of my year in Brazil, and I went to the launch of the government's investment strategy into AI, their development bank and all of those kinds of people. And in that hour session, I think I heard the word data sovereignty, the phrase data sovereignty about 10 times. And it was very clear that Brazil's got this kind of awareness that although it's a developing country, it's a very big one. In fact, there are many data services that work incredibly well and many data sets that work incredibly well there. And they seem to have a kind of, I don't know whether they'd planned it, but a lot of different people thought about the value of the data that Brazil holds and the public value that could be derived from that. and the potential leakage of that value to companies in other countries and in jurisdictions where perhaps the ethical and legal constraints and regulation may not be what we would like to be associated with culture, education, or public services. So I wondered if there were any thoughts on that topic.
Thank you very much. And we add, because we had several questions on the international scale, one question from online, where, putting AI sovereignty aside, can UK actually benefit from US high investment in AI, and what we can do with this, basically, around cheaper and faster internet LLMs for UK? Who want to jump in? Okay, Jess.
Shall I maybe start with the comparisons question? Everywhere is responding to their local constraints and opportunities. I think there's interesting things happening in Finland in terms of the ability to work across government, private sector, and research to really work as a whole country ecosystem to enable AI deployment. They were one of the first movers on creating open AI skills development platforms, but that's now feeding through into kind of large-scale investments in R&D that is connected into the health service and so on. So I think that's a kind of interesting and not cited enough example of an ecosystem working together. I really like the question about like AI getting seen as a quick fix, because that's certainly the top line narrative. And I don't think anybody who's actually deploying is thinking about AI as a quick fix. They're immediately encountering these data issues, these procurement issues, and so on. But we are getting those tangible examples of real service improvements, whether it's social care workers in Peterborough using note-taking apps to enable them to see more patients, or housing officers in Cambridgeshire reviewing consultations, or people monitoring energy flows and transport networks locally. These examples are there, and what we should be doing more in the next phase of development is really connecting what works in practice to that top-line narrative as a way of driving further progress.
Thank you. Antonio?
Well, maybe just to build, say we are definitely seeing people getting productivity improvements from public services, but it always comes back to, what is the true rate limiting factor? So for planning development, yes, some of the AI incubators tools for consultation analysis definitely are saving time, and that is a resource constraint, but that is not the biggest resource constraint which leads to plan development. So it hopefully shines a light on the need to think of the end-to-end. I completely agree. Every country is doing things differently. I mean, just to highlight the points, so probably UAE, India, and Brazil actually are turbocharging ahead at use of AI within public services, but they are in a place where it is easier to mandate and force that, and you get unintended consequences from that. So from the Aadhaar system in India, there's been quite a lot of digital exclusion which has emerged. So there's trade-offs in all of that, and I think one of the challenges with taking international examples is that every country is different and has different strengths and different challenges. And then just on the data sovereignty bit, so I think when I do talks internationally, I think it's a classic British thing. We forget that people think, oh, actually, Britain's great at lots of things. So, the UK Biobank, 100,000 Genome Project. I was in Bristol yesterday at the Isambard Summit. We've got the Dawn supercompute facilities here in Cambridge. Actually, there are lots of UK strengths on data sovereignty, on-premises, large-scale protected, knowing where the data is. And some of the challenge, I think, is just to recognise and celebrate those strengths and encourage them to be better utilised. So a good example for public services is that I think they are seldom users of the supercompute capabilities that we have in the UK. And part of the job of academia and public policy is to join those dots together.
Thank you. Faye?
So I think, just reflecting on the kind of international examples, specifically on education, it is really, really varied. But I don't think, it's the same with any education, whether it's AI or not, it's never going to be the same in every country. Education is so cultural and so specific to the scale and the situation that different countries are in. Estonia are pushing ahead really fast on AI adoption, and some of the Southeast Asian countries, but they're very, very different contexts. I think internationally we're all trying to learn from each other, and different countries are taking different approaches. So I'm not sure there's a right answer, and I don't think we're going to get the one answer from any one country who's got it right. And then on that point of are we seeing it as a quick fix, I think it comes back to kind of your point about the simplicity of messaging. If you can only give a simple message, this will help or this will solve things, then it's going to be seen as a trade-off that it's AI and we're not thinking about the other things. Kind of from within the civil service, we see that there's many, many levers and many, many problems. And just because there is some activity on one area, one problem, does not mean that means you kind of forget about the other challenges. But I think sometimes in conversations with experts, there is something about what's possible and what's feasible and the scope of decisions. So, anyone can say it would be great if we could do this and wave a magic wand. But we also are quite constrained by this. For me, this is my job. This is what I focus on, and these are the decisions that we're facing. So I think it's never a trade-off of just because you're looking at AI, it means you're not looking at other things.
Thank you. And just plug Bennett School research to just two very brief points. On international best practices, I just want to point out on Korea and Japan, they do enormously interesting work around practical evaluation of AI deployment in public sector, in civil service, and this can be some learning points to what to do in UK. And second, on data sovereignty. So from our research, just one example, if you take a look on a region in areas, for example, international forum like African Union, they push very hard for data sovereignty. But if you look on, for example, on the OECD level, and especially if you look on G20 level and G7, they don't want to push for data sovereignty. And one of the explanations can be the country who develop model, they see benefit from flow of data because it feeds their model and helps them to build better models. But countries who cannot build those models yet, they feel that it's just free usage of our data. Those big tech companies and countries use our data to develop their own model, and we not benefit from that. This is why they push hardly on data sovereignty, on digital sovereignty, on all of those models. Thank you. Just check our research. I will collect two questions from the audience because we have one question online, and we need to leave you some time for lunch. So one question here and one question there, and one online when we walk in. The question basically about how we can decide and determine the children's interest when it's come to AI. Should we listen them, and how we can listen them? This is from online. One question from the audience. Mike, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Khaldun Al-Karmadi from Global Cambridge Institute. I have just a very easy question. Many of us are worried about losing our jobs for AI and especially agentic AI. But the question is not about us as individuals. The question is about the country itself. As we know, the most people who will be affected are the people who are working in digital or service economy in general. And we know that UK depends on service economy, especially in London. So UK until now is watching the competition between US and China. And my question is, does UK feel the existential risk because of that? Again, UK is depending on service economy. So what are the ways that the UK is doing to save themselves from that situation if it happened? Thank you.
Thank you. And one question there was, just like, yes.
Hey, thank you, great panel. It doesn't take long looking back in history to realize we're going to fail at something because we as a species have a fantastic habit of deciding on an expectation which far outstrips the actual ability of what we're going to do. I was wondering, with your experience so far individually, where do you think we're going to fail?
Okay. Great, so we have 3 questions. Who want to start? Let's move it around. Antonio, can you start?
Gosh, where is it going to fail? I mean, we'll we all have different questions. I suppose different answers and starting points, but one would be the observation of the Bayesian prior of any transformation and change, like 80, 70, 80, round about those percentages of all change efforts fail, okay? And that's okay. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be ambitious. Doesn't mean that there won't be some successes. Doesn't mean that those failures won't lead to great things. But start with the expectation that this will hard, the costs will overrun, the benefits will take longer, but the end goal will be worth it. And I think that starting point is a much more honest and fruitful place to start with, so almost embracing that as the default. On the UK and the service economy exposure in particular, I mean, that may be straying slightly outside of my public services focus. What I would say is that, to the earlier question about systemic risks, that is a known, again, not necessarily fully mitigated, but how does one fully mitigate these things, risks? And many governments across the world have been doing this, but the UK government in particular has been seeking to upskill the workforce by providing training courses in AI, additional support that can be had, additional grants. But I would suggest that the answer is this going to go the same way of bank tellers or the same way of farming, where automation has really, massively reduced the workforce? We don't quite yet know, but I would have thought approaching it with a desire to get a higher level of familiarity and competence with the tooling is a good start. And then children's interests, I might defer a bit more to Faye. The one thing I will say on that, they're not quite children, but they were younger learners. I was a further education college governor for many years, and there was this, we were forced by the DFE, I should say, to merge, and that was not a great time, but I remember part of the merger, we were advised, you don't want to ask the learners what they think about it because they won't have anything sensible to say, and there was a really patronising approach, and another data point of that is with the PSC, we've been fortunate to work with FE colleges on their kind of a cluster approach to AI, and everything we heard from lecturers was, what about students teaching using AI? And then we did some surveys of what learners thought of AI, and they said, what's the point in doing the work if our assessors are going to be using AI to assess it? And it works both ways.
Fair enough. Faye?
Right, yeah, I'll pick up on that. Should we listen to children? Yes, we should listen to children. I think that's the easiest question. But how is a little bit more difficult? I think that we need to be engaging children and young people in these decisions, particularly because they're going to be living in the world that we're creating now, as well as how it affects them immediately. And I think they need to be able to feed in at many levels. So from an education perspective, there's how do we get young people's voices to feed into education policy around AI, which I've talked about, but also how do we manage to give them a voice about how AI is used in their schools? What are the toolkits that can be used that they can help set the policies within their schools? I think there's some really interesting ways that you can do that. There's legislative theatre, which we've looked at, which is using drama to be able to explore policy issues. If you ever get the chance to do it, I highly recommend. It's amazing. There's open space technology, and then there's actually those AI-enabled kind of democratic technologies, things like Polis as well. And just to pick up on that point of they don't have anything to say, actually the magic thing about deliberation and participatory engagement is even if you take the really most boring, nerdy policy problem and you give it to a group of people for a few hours, they end up coming out as complete nerds about that policy problem with really strong views. So I think we just need to not underestimate the public and children and young people in the kind of the richness and the balanced views that they can really give us.
Thank you.
And maybe building on that, I think you've given a great list of creative ways in which we can bring in those voices. I'd add to that list, there's some work going on by a woman called Jessica Bell at the University of Warwick, thinking about how you can build a data trust around the Born in Scotland birth cohort study, which is tracking data from pregnancy through to when the child turns 18, looking for ways of bringing in the voices of the people affected by that research from an earlier stage. So we're seeing all of these innovations now, and the challenge is for us to figure out how to scale them and institutionalize them so they stop being one-off exercises and start being a way of working that we integrate as standard. On the question about where will this fail, one of our PhD students, Andre Palais, did a great review from a technical perspective on where do AI deployments fail, and perhaps unsurprisingly found that most deployments fail in understanding what the need was in the first instance, so actually defining the problem to be addressed. And I think we can scale that lesson up to a kind of social level, where does this all fail? Fundamentally, if people don't benefit from it, if people's experience of AI is my life is getting worse, I'm seeing all of this investment go in, I'm hearing these conversations about my job's going to be disrupted, and on my day-to-day, I am not having a better experience of my public services because of investments in AI. That's where this fails. People have to see who benefits, who bears the risks, and have a sense that that is done equitably across society or done in a way that protects those who are most vulnerable. And that leads us, I think, to the kind of the existential risk question, where, to me, the existential risk is social and institutional. It's that we're rolling out these technologies at a time when we're simultaneously saying to our regulators that they somehow don't have the capacity or expertise to govern, as if people in the Competition and Markets Authority, the ICO, the MHRA, aren't the people with expertise in how to regulate technology. We have all these skills, but we're sort of undermining our own governance capacity in a wider conversation that is saying only big tech knows how to do AI. It's just not true. So if we can start shifting that conversation, we avoid this kind of institutional existential crisis where we almost lose capacity in our faith, in our ability to govern and direct technology development in a way that does benefit all in society.
Thank you. I feel sad that we should slightly move to the close, because I understand it's not only intellectual food what we need to consume, but also real food. So I want to wrap up with one question which fits so well with the idea for whom, who, and what is the values, because it's all about public good, basically. So I want to ask each of you one very short question. What is the one thing we should do right to achieve or ensure that AI serves for the public good? Jess.
I think I reiterate that point about institutionalizing our public dialogue and engagement. Move it upstream and don't be afraid of involving the public in a conversation about our principles, our priorities, our values, and how those should direct AI development and deployment.
Thank you. Faye?
I think I'd build on that, and I think it's making sure that we have the kind of diverse conversations with experts and with the public. And I think making sure that we're focusing those conversations on solutions. So yes, we've got concerns, yes, we've got worries, and always really welcome the kind of critique and challenge, you know, especially from academia. But sometimes what we need more of is, okay, and now how do we solve this? How do we turn this into a practical solution that starts to actually make change in these areas?
In technical worlds outside of the West Coast model development, there's this concept of smallness. You know, what's the small enough model that we need to solve the problem? And I would encourage people to think about, you know, that, or a concept of enoughness. You know, what's the true problem for a citizen that we're trying to solve, and what is enough AI to just about solve that, and not think that we need a sledgehammer to crack a nut for everything.
Thank you. So wait. 2 moments. Number 1, please remember about lunch. Number 2, we have brilliant researchers in our school, and they did a great job to put the posters. Please check them, engage with the researchers. And now, please join me to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.